All right, so let's get started with our presenter today. Continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to present Adam Oster. Adam is the Community Engagement Librarian for the Library of Michigan. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Grand Valley State University with a minor in Political Science and Secondary Education certification. He also has a Master of Library Science degree from Indiana University. His interests include genealogy and local history research. Today's presentation is titled Family History Research to the Library of Michigan. So without further ado, I would like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Sue. And thank you everybody for attending today. Just a couple housekeeping things. When it comes to asking questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. I will say that sometimes I don't always look over to my other screen to see it right away. So if I don't get to it immediately, I'll try to go through everything at the end. Or if you do want to, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question in the midst of the presentation. You're not going to stop me, stop any sort of rhythm that I've got going. So feel free. I keep it very relaxed. Besides just the little intro that Sue gave about me, I've spent roughly about 20 years working in libraries, starting out as a page all the way up to now my present position. I've been at the Library of Michigan for just over 2 years, and before that, I was a librarian with Kent District Library over in the Grand Rapids area. I don't really have too many connections to the west side of the country, other than I have a cousin who's in Salem, Oregon, and another cousin who lives in Logan, Utah. I haven't been to Reno yet, but at some point it would be really cool to come out there and see that portion of the country. So as we're going on today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about just the Library of Michigan in general, a little bit of our history, what it is that we do and why we do it, a breakdown of our collections, and a review through our website just to show the different things that we have on there. So if you ever do get an opportunity to come to Lansing, Michigan, to our facility, I certainly encourage you to do so. We've got a really cool building, and something to just kind of point out about the building itself. You can see this middle picture on the middle of the slide. This is the main entrance of the Library of Michigan. On the west side is the library itself. The building itself is referred to as the Michigan Library and Historical Center. So the library, like I said, is on the west side, and then on the east side is the Archives of Michigan, as well as the Michigan History Center, which is the State Museum. If you do ever come there, we kind of consider it the one-stop shop for all family history research, whether you're looking for the more published type of material that we have at our side, or more those original records that are over at the archives. So you'll learn a little bit more of the type of things that we have. So if you do have questions about some things that maybe we don't have, I can kind of answer those, but I can't speak to everything that they have over at the archives. Okay, next slide. So what is the Library of Michigan? We are an institution created by the state of Michigan to collect, preserve, and provide access to the story of the state, and to support libraries in their role as essential community anchors. We have 3 different departments that are entities that sort of exist within the Library of Michigan. I work for Special Collections, which is all about the physical collections of the building and showcasing that material. We also have our Technical and Access Services department, which focuses on sort of the behind the scenes of processing and taking care of cataloging and electronic resources. And then there's also library development, which is focuses on supporting all, I think there's like, if you include branches and bookmobiles, there's like 650 libraries in Michigan. It's roughly about 300 to 350 institutions, but then overall it's like almost 650 locations. And so that staff helps provides a variety of different services for them, whether it's legal consulting to youth services coordinating and data coordinating and other different things. The Michigan eLibrary is also through them as well. We've existed since 1828. That's when the territorial librarian position was first created, and we serve the Library of Michigan serves state government and the people of Michigan, much as how the Library of Congress works at the federal level. If you when we transitioned from being the state library, or from being the Michigan State Library to the Library of Michigan, the idea was that it would be modeled much how like the Library of Congress works. So we were in Detroit, starting in our creation in 1828 when the territorial capital was located there. 1837 when we transitioned to statehood, we then went from being the territorial library to the state library. 1847 is when the capital moved from Detroit to Lansing itself, as Lansing was being developed as a city and sort of the central hub for all state government in Michigan. And we then transitioned through a number of different buildings for a long time, starting in the 1870s. I think in 1879, we were sort of the west wing of the Capitol building. If you ever get a chance to go to the Michigan State Capitol and you're in the west side of the building, we were on floors, I think 2 through 4, where a lot of our collections were in there. And eventually we transitioned to another state office building. And then 1983 is when we became the Library of Michigan in sort of a reorganization. And then in 1988 is when the Michigan Library and Historical Center opened, and we've presently been in that building since then, other than with COVID going on, where we've primarily been working from home. We have some select staff that are going in, but for now, we're still under a work from home order. This is just a picture of the interior of the Library of Michigan. Primarily, we start on the second floor, and on the different sides of it, we have collections that are on the lower sides of the second floor. A lot of periodicals are over on this side, and a lot of the Michigan collection is over here. Third floor is where we have the law library and other different periodicals, and part of our main collection are over here. We do have select Fed docs that are up on fourth floor, and then other material that are part of the main collection that's over on the other side. And then also the rare book room is up on the fourth floor on this side as well. So very large building. Something that's kind of cool about the architecture of it is it has a very cathedral-like feel. And I was pointing out to Sue when her and I were talking a few days ago that this little bridge right here, in a way, kind of acts as a stage, so that you could have the tables moved out of the way and have it acting as sort of a placement for a speaker or a musical group. And so it has a bit of that sort of cathedral quite like quality to it, which makes it really cool. Other than if somebody happens to be talking on their cell phone or talking very loudly, then you can hear it almost anywhere in the building. But it's a very neat and great place to work at. So I definitely encourage you, once we reopen, if you're in Michigan, please stop by. As far as what we offer and why we do it, Michigan's history is recounted through the Library of Michigan's collections. It spans the written history of Michigan and includes material related to the old Northwest Territory that we were part of prior to the creation of the Michigan Territory in 1805, and then also content that after the Michigan Territory was created in 1805 on up until statehood in 1837. We have a variety of different collections that provide layers of information from different sources. If anybody is looking for facts, data, statistics, things like that, they're not hard to find. And another way that you can look at our collection is it offers insight into perspective and context of why people were doing things, whether it has to deal with the laws of the state or other different aspects of what was going on in time periods of Michigan's history. We can help people find everything from family history content, government information. We're also home to the state law library, so we also answer questions specifically related to that. And as I'm going along here, I'm going to go into a few more details of some of those other different things. When it comes to the individual collections within the Library of Michigan, you'll find, if you're talking with staff, the kind of nomenclature that we use is we sort of divide everything by these sort of main headings, where we have the Michigan Documents Collection, which focuses on everything from the compiled joint documents produced by the state of Michigan, sort of during the first few decades of the state's history, that you have all these different things that are compiled together. And then as state governments started to expand, then you start finding annual reports of individual departments and agencies and commissions, also finding our compiled laws and rules, all within the Michigan Documents Collection. We then have what is sort of kind of the crown jewel of everything that we have, what we refer to as the Michigan Collection, because the idea is we try to collect every published sort of thing that comes out related to the state of Michigan, whether it's by somebody who is a Michigan author or something that deals with Michigan itself, and that can be printed. We try to collect also audio recordings, like published audio, video recordings, lots of different things like that. So the breakdown of what's in the Michigan Collection, especially that's more of interest to family history researchers, are going to be newspapers, periodicals, gazetteers, and city directories, plat maps, and other different types of maps. I know we also have a collection of Sanborn maps in there. County and or place histories. This could be everything from like the history of Ingham County, Michigan, to the history of Muskegon High School football. I know somebody compiled a history of that several years ago. We have a copy of that on our collections. Cemetery transcriptions. If a DAR group does a cemetery transcription and compiles something, we try to get our hands on it. Same thing if a genealogical society or a museum or historical society compiles stuff together, we try to get our hands on those as well. Also other different unpublished material. Something that we try to do is something that hasn't necessarily been published by like a regular publishing house like Simon and Schuster. You know, if something isn't published by them but still is, also try to have those. Law collection, I mentioned we're the home of the state law library, so we have a lot of different things related to the laws and codes and other different things like that in our collection. We also have a rare book room, and the oldest thing that goes back there is from 1490, and a lot of different things that are in there, both related to Michigan and just some really rare things that were in the early collections of the Library of Michigan, but weren't necessarily sort of related to Michigan itself, because one of the early state librarians starting in the 1870s was like collecting unique and interesting things out there to have, where she was getting it from like Great Britain and elsewhere. Like I know we have a book that's like one of the limited English printings of the Hunchback of Notre Dame that was like one of 500 that we have in our collection. This may not necessarily apply to everybody who's listening today, but it's still important to kind of note is that we're always looking for material for our collections. So if you ever do come across something, if it somehow made it out to Nevada or elsewhere of where you're from, that somehow relates to Michigan and you think it might be something that we would want, let us know. We have a page on our website that's for the types of collections that we look for. It's just michigan.gov/library gift. So you can look on there and see a bit more details of the types of things that we look for. We always try to alert everybody that you never know what's in your closet or in your attic or what some great uncle who passed away handed on to you. So feel free to give us a shout out if you happen to come across something. Going a little bit more into the Michigan Documents Collection, these are publications compiled and disseminated by state and territorial governments of Michigan. The oldest material dates back to 1805. The reason why it's valuable is it records the development, growth, and change of state government over time. records the movement of people and how the government responds to people and the people's shifts in perspective over time. Government units compile reams of information daily that touch on any and all aspects of life. So knowing how Michigan's government works and the types of information that they collect, it can be invaluable for any sort of family history researcher. That knowing the rules and the structure makes a big difference for understanding how to find like vital records. Knowing that Michigan started requiring those in the 1860s, which is a lot different than what you would find in other states throughout the U.S. Different examples of things that we have: the Michigan Manual, which is the yearly publication that lists sort of the rules and of state government and members of the legislature and a list of all the different departments. It's really cool. They're all bright red for us, and so you can see them on the shelves, and it's like this whole wall shelf full of red books and goes back a long period of time. The joint documents, which are a compilation of earliest 19th century government reports, other different annual reports of state government departments and agencies and commissions, compiled laws and rules. Some other interesting things related to that is that are also considered documents are the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Collection. So this was developed by the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society. I believe it was in the 1870s or 1880s that they started this. And it was at a time where it was getting the 100-year anniversary of the US as a country. And what they wanted to do was start compiling the stories of people that came to Michigan during those times of early population to the territory and then the state, and compile that all together. And it's a multi-volume set. I want to say it's up to like 40 volumes, and it's got pictures and other different things. So if you've got somebody who was an early individual coming to Michigan, it's a great tool to look through to find if there's any information that was compiled on them. The Michigan History Magazine, even though it's sort of labeled a magazine, for the longest period of time, it was put out by the state of Michigan prior to or until it was then turned over to the Historical Society of Michigan. So you've got many years, you're talking decades and decades of content that relates to Michigan's history that people were writing about, and you can find stories and articles that may be of interest related to somebody who's doing family history in the state. Some other things of the types of requests that we get, where we're sort of like following the money, the different revenue forecast reports, budgets, executive budgets, appropriations, financial reports. Maybe not necessarily a immediate thing that's of interest to a family history researcher, but still, it's like follow the money. You're going to follow an understanding of how things are going on in the state. It's also good to know when laws or rules changed. And so that's where we have the Michigan House and Senate bills and analyses, the compiled laws, the administrative code, Michigan Register, and annual administrative code supplement. So you can find out that like when, like I mentioned earlier, when things like vital records were being required, and maybe changes in how the administration of that was supposed to go, because you'll find in Michigan that initially it was sort of like these county register books, and then it was shifted over into being like individual page sheets for the vital records. And knowing how things changed in the law is important to the types of records that you're going to find. Other different types of specific requests of like if people were asking like if my ancestor was, say, a prisoner at one of Michigan state prisons. Well, some of the things that we have are going to be the annual reports of the state prisons. We have a large collection of prisoner newsletters, or penal periodicals is what we call them. And so it can be interesting kind of just going through those to try and find if you've got some more unscrupulous member of your family that ended up in a Michigan penal location, or things related like the state hospitals, the psychiatric hospitals. If you had an ancestor who was a legislator, the different things like the Michigan Manual. We also have a legislative biographical database that we put together. So you can find information on there. Other different types of things like Gongward News, which relates to state government activity. We try to collect all those different types of things. Just an example of, say, like an annual report. This one I've started putting in some of my presentations just because of how it relates to the COVID pandemic that we've been dealing with over the past year. And this is the 1919 annual report of the Commissioner of the Michigan Department of Health, focusing on the annual report for the influenza pandemic that was going on in 1918 and 1919. And so we have in here where they've got a whole section on different communicable diseases like tuberculosis, typhoid, measles, whooping cough, all that, what the state was dealing with. And then we've got influenza. And we can see here where it's got a breakdown of what the state was doing, where the disease was first encountered in Michigan and elsewhere, what they did as far as like closing different like churches, dance halls, pool rooms, different things like that. And then something that's also sort of interesting too is they have the graphs of the influenza as cases as it was going throughout the state. And it kind of reminds us a little bit similar to what we've been seeing in the news today. So my grandma always talked about how past is prologue and things have a tendency to kind of repeat themselves. Well, this is a perfect example of when something like that happened. This is a really cool one that I wish they produced more of, but in 1915, there was the Michigan Manual of Freedmen's Progress, which was produced in conjunction with an exhibit that was at the National Half-Century Anniversary of Negro Freedmen Exposition and Lincoln Jubilee in Chicago of that year. And essentially, it's an overview of African Americans in history, shows examples of African Americans in a variety of different professional pursuits like attorneys, doctors, musicians, lecturers, inventors, ministers, people that were in politics and government, business owners, different organizations like religious groups, secret societies, charitable organizations, homeowners, military veterans, statistics. And it's a really great tool if you're doing any sort of African-American research related to the state of Michigan. I don't know if anything was ever produced in other states, but somehow this got produced in 1915, and it's a really invaluable tool for anybody who's doing that early 20th century African-American research. Getting more into just the Michigan collection itself, this is where we have both privately and commercially published materials, spans the history of Michigan and its territorial days. And we certainly have our fair share of books, but we also try to collect things like maps, brochures, booklets, plats, spans a variety of different subjects, provides a snapshot of Michigan from the people, the places, the events, all over time. Normally, this is something that you can just walk in and look at on the shelves, but because the building is closed, we can't do that right now. If there was something that you wanted to access from in a rare book room, that has to be done always through an appointment ahead of time, just so that we have somebody who can be up there to get the material and meet somebody. We rarely ever do it just sort of on the cuff. Some other different collections that we have, newspapers, holdings are by county, and I'll show on our website kind of how you can search a little bit more for the material in there. We also have what's called the newspaper family histories, which shows the evolution of a newspaper of, say, when it was bought out by another one or when the name changed. So if you were trying to track down all the different newspapers that were in Hillsdale, Michigan, you would be able to use that to kind of know what dates would be your focus of the titles that were there at particular times. We also have vertical files related to different topics that we try to put material in. We also have an index of magazines, of different periodicals, also gazetteers and city directories, plats and maps, county and place histories, unpublished material. So lots of different things that you can find just within the collections of the Michigan collection. Here's just some images of what the interior of those areas look like. So we've got our periodicals right here. up on the top left, and then we have the newspaper collection right here. It's primarily all on microfilm, and we've got close to, I think, at least over 100,000. Well, maybe not 100,000, but you're talking like tens of thousands of rolls of microfilm because of all 83 counties of Michigan that we try to collect all the newspapers for, and other different things that we have on microfilm as well. We have our map section right here. So we have all these flat files that have everything from highway commission maps to posters and other different things. I'll never forget the one day that we had a whole bunch of people from the Michigan Department of Transportation in like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago when I first started. And it's really cool seeing MDOT people go gaga over, highway maps that were produced in the 1950s and 60s. So anybody and everybody will find something of interest when they come in the Library of Michigan. Some other just different examples of what we have, different state business gazetteers that go from the 1860s up until the 1930s, newspapers, 3,000 titles that are on microfilm, just anything and everything that you can find that gives that life and times information and localities of all areas of Michigan. Goes back till the 1840s. There's a little section that's on the Central Michigan University website that talks about some of the early newspapers of Michigan that go, I think Detroit or Monroe was one of the first ones that were producing them like right around soon after we became a territory. Finding anything on newspapers on our website, and I'll give a live demonstration a little bit later for this, but what you would do is you would go on to michigan.gov/Library of Michigan, hit for the public, and then there's where you can find the newspaper section on there. Other periodicals that we have, just some examples. It could be everything from Michigan Airports and Roads, which was a periodical starting around 1907, 1908 that would go all the way up until the 21st century. Things like that. You can find the name changes of forests and roads and different construction. Something that, just knowing all these different periodicals that were produced by private and public company agencies, that you can find lots of different things that relate to family history in them. And we also have what's called the Michigan Magazine Index to try and find them based on different titles and subjects. So that adds an added tool when you're trying to search for them. Other different maps and flat files. So we try to have everything that's from federal level, state, and local, spans the history of Michigan. I like to highlight this particular one because what it is the 1945 Farm People of Michigan according to ethnic stocks. So if you were trying to find where Finnish farmers were, and African American and Dutch and Flemish and English and all of that. At that time period, they did sort of like a census of all these different farmers, and you could find that more your African Americans are going to be down by Cass County and Cassopolis, and slowly starting to get into areas of Detroit and Muskegon. Your Finnish and English and Cornish are going to have a whole bunch of they're up in the UP, Dutch around sort of the West Michigan, Detroit area. Just a really cool map that if you were trying to find, like, you knew your family was of a certain ethnicity, and trying to find the likelihood of where they would have gone if they were congregating with people of that same ethnicity, you could use a map like this to kind of narrow the field down a bit. Other local government resources, we try to beyond state and federal, we try of things that relate to Michigan, we try to get regional, county, township, municipal, and tribal. Common resources that we try to get our hands on are like the township and city charters, constitutions, ordinances and codes, treaties, agreements, and compacts, meeting minutes if they've been compiled, annual and financial reports, plans, studies, reports, and maps. All these different things we try to include in our collections if they have a Michigan connection. Annual reports, these are really interesting, especially if you get to the ones like the inspectors of mines. So these would be up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where you had a lot of the copper mining going on. And in this particular one, it talks about the different accidents that were going on in the mines. One in which is interesting, where we have this guy, William Epplett Jr., who died from falling in the number 5 shaft from the 7th to the 10th level, which was roughly 225 feet. And it goes into the circumstances of what happened as he fell. I believe he lost his balance, and talks a little bit more about how there was about 20 inches of platform to stand on, and just did not have a lot of room, and somehow he lost his balance. Goes even into having English parentage, 18 years of age, the coroner who did the inquest, and so much more information about the circumstance of his death that you might not have found in, say, the newspaper, or you know, knowing that helps get information from like where the mine was. So this is some images that are from the Library of Congress page, where you can see Ironwood, where that mine was located, and then an image of it itself from the Library of Congress. And having all that, we can then have the death certificate, and you'll see on there where it only has like 1 or 2 lines of what happened. You know, basically just saying that he died falling down the number 5 shaft. But using those annual reports, we get greater context of what was going on. The law collection has a lot related to private law, so single person or small group, found in the session laws of jurisdiction, so the Michigan Public and Local Acts, sometimes referred to as relief awarded by legislature. Things that you'll find in here are going to be like name changes, divorce issues, and land issues subject to private law. Names can be found in indexes of annual volumes. Unfortunately, we don't have a cumulative index of all these sorts of things, but when you're looking at sort of the early history of Michigan, you're going to find that like there wasn't as many government agencies in courts, and so you may have more the state Supreme Court doing things like name changes and divorces before the institution of like justices of the peace and the district court system that we utilize today. So it's important knowing how all of that fits into the system when you're trying to research in something related to Michigan and the law. Looking into our rare book collection, it has over 30,000 items, including books, maps, posters, newspapers, magazines, and other print resources, just covering a spectrum of subjects, as well as other collections in the Library of Michigan. A distinction of these materials are generally the 19th century and earlier. The oldest from 1490 is Nicholas Stratham's Abridgment of the Law. It's a French document of English text. I still have not seen it because it's just one of those fragile items that we don't pull out very often. Most materials are available to researchers on request, but there are some like Stratham's book that we just don't bring out. Those are just the ones where they're very fragile, and we try to have other reproductions of them, either on photocopy or microfilm. And like I mentioned earlier, all this is only accessible by appointment when the building is open. Right now, like I haven't even been in the rare room in probably over a year. Just a back, vault image of inside the vault itself. So most people won't get to see this, but this is the temperature controlled room. We actually have a picture here of my coworker, Matt Pacer, with the Capitol historian, Valerie Marvin, who, if you're ever looking for a good person to talk about the history of the Michigan Capitol, Valerie is a great person I would recommend contacting. Vast knowledge of the history of Michigan government as it relates to the Capitol buildings. But it's temperature controlled, kept at a certain humidity. You're only seeing 2 sort of sets of shelves here, but it goes back for several more into the right side that you're not seeing in the photo. Now, I'm going to talk just a little bit about library cards. This won't really pertain to you just because library cards, as of what it is at this moment, are for Michigan residents only. Now, that may change. My understanding is there are some state libraries out there that allow non-residents to get them. I believe the state library in Virginia is one. So something you could look into is checking on there. If you look on the it's what's called COSLA, which is an acronym that is basically for the Chief Officers of State Library Agencies. Their website has a directory of every single state library agency, and you can find the links to them on there. So a purpose of having a card through the Library of Michigan is that it allows people to check out materials from our circulating collections, allows people to borrow materials through Melcat, which is the statewide circulation system that allows material to be transferred from one library to another, and having access to most of our databases, as we have a number of different subscription databases that normally you would only be able to use in the building, but because of the COVID restrictions, we've made them available so that people can access them from home itself. And we have a card application on our website. So if you ever do become a resident of Michigan, or if we lift the restriction for non-residents, that's where you would go to apply for a card. It's always important to know with state library cards, at least for Michigan, is that they don't act as a substitute for your local public library card, and that they only provide access to the specific services from the Library of Michigan itself and not a local public library. I would assume that Nevada and other places elsewhere may have similar sorts of restrictions on theirs. Okay, just to double checking the questions here. I think some of these I'm going to have to wait till the end to get to. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of talk about some of the online resources that we have through the Library of Michigan. Some of these are available for anybody to use, and other ones are for card holders. And I'm also going to show our website itself. So Library of Michigan Digital is sort of our online platform for digitized material that we have scanned out of our own collection. It was recently launched just within the last few years. Previously, there was a website called Governing Michigan, but it's been changed into LM Digital. And if there's things that we have that we only have in print, but are before the copyright restrictions kick in, we're hoping that we can take those and then start scanning them to put online in a limited format. Just because right now we don't have the staff to do a whole ton of that yet, but that's sort of the hope in the future. We also have what's called the Legislative Biographical Database, which is if you're trying to research any legislator in Michigan, we actively try to put content on there all the way going back to the early statehood and territorial days. The Michigan Authors and Illustrators Database is where it covers every author that is from Michigan or has Michigan ties. So I've had a few instances where people have contacted us and they've had like a grandfather or a great so-and-so relative who was an author, and they were trying to track down information about them, and they happen to be included in the Authors and Illustrators database. We also do what's called the Government Web Snapshot, which is where we do periodic archived versions of state government websites, whether it's the Department of Education or Corrections or Transportation. So that way, periodically, we're having versions of these pages made available in case changes occur and something all of a sudden disappears. As far as finding the family history databases on our website, the subscription ones, you can either go under our family history page, or there's one that's specifically for online resources for card holders. That's all under for the public, and we'll see a little bit more of that in just a minute. As far as the different type of databases that we offer for cardholders, sort of a selection, or most of them includes things like the African American Biographical Database, Ancestry Library Edition, Black Thought and Culture, Fold 3, Newspaper Archive, newspapers.com, Ethnic News Watch, and then through ProQuest, both the Detroit Free Press and the Michigan Chronicle. We're slowly trying to add more in, especially with the COVID restrictions on the building, but this is sort of the ones that we have available for cardholders right now. One thing I will point out too is if there are articles that you're trying to track down, whether it's an obituary or there was something that was published in a Michigan newspaper, people that are non-residents can still email us or call us and ask us to see if we can look up something in these. Try to restrict it to like just 1 or 2, because there's only right now, I think maybe 8 of us that work in special collections that do this stuff. So we don't have a lot of staff capacity to do it, but say you're trying to find something that is in a particular newspaper and we have these databases, we can at least do a quick search to see if we can find them and then send you the digital version of it. We also have a number of databases through the Michigan eLibrary, also known as MEL. The main one, which we find under e-resources to find them. These include the Michigan History Magazine. There's several years of back issues that are on there. MyHeritage, which a lot of libraries use, as well as ebook collections that are on there, which aren't necessarily a database of records, but there's a lot of published guides that are in there that relate to family history research. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my PowerPoint and do a quick demonstration of our website. I'm just going to drag over my screen here. Okay, maximize this. So this is the Library of Michigan's website. This to get to it, it's michigan.gov/Library of Michigan. It's broken down by for the public, for libraries, for state employees, and about the library. Sort of the main area that's of interest to family history researchers is going to be under for the public. This is where we have our family history section, content related to the law library, Michigan materials, Michigan newspapers, rare books. Just to click on family history, come up here in just a second. This is where we have different things like county guides, where we have divided up everything by all 83 counties, where each one has sort of a bibliographic write-up on them to show samples of like what printed books are on them, other different resources that we have. So if there's a particular county that you're in interest of, that's a good place to start with. We're also a Family Search affiliate library, so people will come to our location to in order to access some of the content that's only available if you're an affiliate library. You can't get in our building, but I think the Wi-Fi extends out far enough that you could theoretically be outside the building on a laptop and still be able to access it. And then we also have on here where the listing to go to the archives in Michigan is on there. We're just launching a virtual program series that people can sign up for, relating to a lot of the stuff that we're kind of talking about today, as well as other things like Ancestry and MyHeritage. And then other different resources that we have down here, how to get to like different societies, our catalog, what vital records that we have at the library. This is really cool, the Michigan Genealogy Research Network, which is a list of societies and genealogists that will do research in Michigan or in specific counties. Now, we don't endorse any of them, but if somebody is looking for a lot of material to be researched, this is a good place to look to, that we try to keep some information on there. The listing of our databases right there. Going to newspapers, I'm just gonna click on the main one because it's divided up into the family histories, Newspaper resources is where you can find like online versions of ones that different entities have digitized, and then also a list of the ones that are on microfilm. Clicking on newspaper resources, the sort of important one to note here is this digital Michigan newspaper portal, which is put out by the Clark Historical Library at Central Michigan University. They have a really great guide of newspapers. And then we also have on here where like Allegan District Library digitized the Allegan Journal and several other newspapers. Charlevoix, Grand Haven, Pinckney, Saginaw News, Sandusky, a lot of different ones that are listed on there. The newspaper family histories, I'll just click on that a second. You look by city. So if we were going to look for, let's think of a bit larger city. So like if we were going to look for Saginaw, we would go under S. And then it breaks down the different individual papers, or if there were small ones that really didn't last that long, you would click on that and it would show those different ones. I think the Saginaw News is still in publication. Yeah, so it gives a breakdown of the years in which it was in existence under different names and other things like that. Okay. And lastly, just under Michigan materials, I'm just going to click on this. So this is a breakdown of a few different things. Michigan in brief is a good spot to go if you just want a great snapshot of what Michigan is. Book lists that are on there. We also have our county guides. Bibliographies are where we try to break down different topics that people may have interest in researching. So if you're looking into Michigan lighthouses or land records, census research guide, the penal publications, I'll just click on that one because it's interesting. You know, everything from the State Girls Training School to the Saugatuck Dunes Correctional Facility, the Ionia Reformatory, that a lot of these were all published by the prisons themselves or the prisoners that were there, so you can find some really interesting stuff. Okay. Other different guides, the newspaper subject guide, things like even like fur trading. It's also good knowing about the Michigan imprints. So this is a list where during the WPA time, they were trying to compile the list of all these different publications that were produced pre-1876, and there was a project by somebody where to compile all those indexes, an index of all of those together. So that's a really good tool if you're trying to, you don't know the publication, but you know the time frame of where something could have been published. So that's a great tool to look at as well. So does anybody have any questions so far about the website while I've got it up here? Got the catalog right here. We try to list different things as far as news and exhibits and other things that are going on right now. Like the Michigan Notable Book List was just put out in January of this year. So if you want to read books that have a more Michigan focus, the Notable Books List has been put out since the 1990s. A lot of great stuff that's on there, both fiction and nonfiction books.
Adam, you mentioned vital records. I'm sure that the many people in the lab today, their ears perked up when you said that.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you actually hold vital records there?
Let me bring up the guide and explain a little bit more about that, because there is sort of a distinction with that. Now, we do not have the actual records themselves. So those are held by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So with our vital records guide here, we have sort of a breakdown of the vital records division, a little bit of the law. Let's see. Breakdown of what we have on microfilm at the library, the types of information that's on there. But we don't, what we have is that we have microfilm versions of anything that is, I think with birth, we're supposed to have at least 100 years or older. We try to have. With deaths, it's 75 years and back. I know microfilm wise, we that's in the collection right now cut off at 1920. For some reason, several years ago, they hadn't been getting the microfilm for the death certificates post 1920 up until, I think the law makes it so that it's like 1946 is the most recent one that you can put online. Now, there is a website that we have contributed for that's technically through the archives of Michigan called Michiganology. And they have on there the statewide death records that go from, I think, 1946 until 1897. It can be a little bit quirky to search on there. We don't have any control over that, so that's something that you would have to contact the archives for. But I know a lot, the initial batch of death certificates came from our microfilm collection, where it was scanned from the 1897 to 1920 that was put on here. And then the archives has somehow worked out something with MDHHS to get those. But I think there's another thing that we have under family history that gives a little bit better breakdown of some of the vital records, and that is, yeah, here, Michigan Vital Records Research at the Library of Michigan. This I know I updated like myself within the last year, and so it lists here what's on microfilm, where you see that MFM, that stands for the microfilm call number, where there are some that are on Ancestry Library Edition, so like marriages from 1868 to 1925, licenses that go up until the 50s, except for the ones where, because of privacy laws, that they have to be 75 years or older. When it comes to divorces, that gets really interesting too, where we have like an index, and then we have like on microfilm a summary, and the summary is only like the one-page certificate, and that's also similar to what you would find on Ancestry. But if you're looking for the actual case, that you have to either go to the court where it occurred at, or you have to see if it somehow got included at the archives of Michigan. Other different things I know you can find on like Family Search for vital records. There's a lot that are being put on there, but no matter what, when it comes to vital records research with Michigan, ultimately, if you want copies of like the originals, you either have to go to the county clerks or the New Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Start with the clerks first, because it's sometimes easier getting it through them. Sometimes it's a little bit cheaper, just as far as like the costs. And if you look on the directory of Michigan County Clerks that we have linked to right here, you could then find their contact information. But yeah, it's a good question. It gets a little bit complicated just because of who does what. Like some things are at the archives, some things we have. Some of those decisions just go back to, you know, originally it was us, but then when the archive started to come into its own as an institution following the 1951 state office building fire, then you got to sort of track like how things were distributed out between these two different agencies. So,
now,
great question.
Unfortunately, our local libraries do not have the library edition of Ancestry.com. Down in the southern part of the state, in the Las Vegas area, yes, they do. But up here in the northern part, unfortunately, they do not. So if somebody wanted you to go into your microfilm because they did not have access to Ancestry Library Edition, would they be able to reach out to you and you could help them with that?
If they know like you know, enough of the specifics about a person, where if they said, hey, I found like an obituary from 1879 and I'm trying to find the actual death listing, Can you help me find it? We can certainly either look through the microfilm or look on family search. I will say, like with family search, you can look on there and get like the 1860s all the way up until at least the 20s on there. It starts getting into that time frame where it's like post 1920s, where we'll have some just on microfilm, but then there's some that we don't have on microfilm because we haven't gotten those copies from MDHHS. And so then you have to, I guess the best way to say is like, send us your question and then we'll try to get you in the direction of where you need to go to based on the time frame that you're trying to track something down. So we're going to end up, I think, looking at the library as a bit more of a facilitator as opposed to an actual holder of a particular record, depending on what it is. Okay. I think that's it about what I'm going to show on the website. Just a few other things. Bring up the PowerPoint here. Okay, so to get onto the homepage, it's michigan.gov/Library of Michigan. Answer catalog is our catalog for finding things. I always recommend people mainly stick with a keyword search instead of a title search. As far as accessing some of the things on our website, you don't need a library card in order to access the website itself. You only need a library card if you're trying to access the subscription databases. Let's see. I see there's a question here. I'm looking for a death record for 1863. See, the state was not recording. Is it possible the county might have that, or were records just not kept prior to that? That's a good question. I would definitely first start out with the county. There may have been local ordinances that required things to be kept at that level. It just wasn't until 1867, 1868, when it was a statewide mandate that every county had to track their vital records and then submit copies onto the duplicate copies onto the state. Now you can also still check with Health and Human Services. They may have things that go back further than that 1867 date, but that's when it's still kind of a little bit fuzzy. Start with the county, then check with MDHHS. And then if you're not finding it, then you're going to want to start thinking about other ways of trying to track the actual death, whether it was a newspaper or the church, if the family was going to church as part of religious beliefs. Start thinking about the other things in which something would have been tracked, probate records, those sorts of things, other stuff like that. And like I mentioned, we have the different government information, law library section that's on there, the newspapers, the Michigan materials and rare books. If people do want me to go into those other sections, I can show them, but it's pretty straightforward when you get on there. A good reference source, Sue, if you don't have this at your library and you know you're going to have a lot of people that are doing Michigan research, I would recommend getting this book, Michigan Genealogy Sources and Resources by Carol McGinnis. There's two different editions of it. Try to, if you can, get the second edition. I think it came out like 2005, somewhere around that time period. But it's really good as far as identifying what records are at state and regional level, different vital records, court and land records, military records, newspapers, census records, and listing just what different institutions have them. So if it's not with the Library of Michigan or it's not with the state archives, there's some things that are maybe kept at like the, I don't know, Harbor Springs Library up in Emmett County, or especially when you start getting down to those things like the state census records, because so many things were, around World War I, a lot of things were sort of tossed out for like paper drives during the war, or things just got tossed out because they had the compiled reports based on the information, and they weren't thinking like the need for family history researchers 150 years afterwards looking for content. So Great book to look through. I would definitely recommend if you get a chance, get a copy of that, or at least look at it if you're going to be doing much more Michigan research. And I think that's about it as far as the main part of what I'm going to talking about. I can certainly open things up to questions. I'll look through the chat here. I might have missed a couple things on there, so you're welcome to unmute and ask the question if I missed it.
Adam, this is April.
Yeah.
I sent you a chat directly to you, not to the whole group. Just wanted to bring your attention to that, and I gave you my direct email address. It was regarding the pioneers. You said you were looking for pioneers. So I have family that go back into mission to 1830 something.
Okay.
So, and I have a lot of information on all of them. So just wanted you to check that email. And then one other question, in your collections, you were talking about the cemeteries.
Yes.
Okay, I know that there was a cemetery that, sorry, my dog just saw somebody. I noticed that there was a, let me start again, my dog distracted me. I know there was a cemetery in Deerfield, Michigan, because my third or fourth great grandfather was on the board of it. And I assume that his father and several of the descendants were buried there. But apparently it no longer exists. Is there any way to find out if the state kept any records on that cemetery?
Well, what we would have, if there was if the WPA or the DAR did any sort of transcriptions of cemeteries in Livingston County, and then that somehow got bound into a volume and given to us. So the first thing you could do is you could look on our catalog just for Livingston County cemeteries as a keyword search, and see what comes up on there. And if we had anything that related to Deerfield, then that would be listed on there. In fact, let me end my slideshow here a second and go to the website. And I can use that as an example of just on our catalog. So let's just do Livingston County cemeteries. Oops. Sure why that's putting that up. Let's see, and while that's going, I'm just going to bring up the county guide for Livingston County because I'm curious what that's going to have on there. Because I think we tried to put the listings of different cemeteries on there. Let's go on. Okay, so there's a Livingston County cemetery directory. Rural cemeteries, Marion and Putnam Townships. And this one right here. Let's take a look. Okay, that one's only at the archives. That one's only at the archives. One thing I should note too is that our catalog is a shared catalog between the Library of Michigan, the Archives of Michigan, and Michigan State University. So you're going to find some things in there that are at the library or at one of those other two institutions. So it does kind of make a difference. Let's see here. Let's try newspapers, records. So like this one, the Cemeteries of Livingston County, Michigan, it looks like that was published around, or at least compiled during the turn of the century. And so that would probably be at the time period when they were still burying people there. But how far back, April, you were saying you were looking at around the 1830s? So it could be that they...
This particular person died in 1863.
Okay, so I think that might be a good book that may have something listed in there. So I would say the best thing to do, just because of the limited access that we have to our building right now, if you send an email to librarian@michigan.gov and say, hey, I'm looking for this person. I think they might be listed in this book. We could then, of the staff who does have access to the building, the next time that they're in there, we could take a look at it to see if they do have a listing in the transcription to see if they're there. And that would be probably the best way to kind of start answering your question, to see if they're there and if we have anything more on the cemetery itself. So does that kind of answer your question?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Cool. All right.
While we're waiting for the rest of the class to come up with a question, I have a question. You mentioned unpublished material.
Yeah.
As a librarian, and also as a genealogist, that perks up my interest. Can you kind of give us a little bit more information on what kind of items that pertain to family history research is in the unpublished materials?
Well, it's going to be, I'd say the first way to look at it is unpublished materials where it's been sort of like, where somebody has done like a cemetery transcription and it's just sort of in like a bunch of sheets that have been put in a binder. That's kind of how we approach unpublished material. Or if it's a, I don't know, a series of trying to think of something good, a good way to describe it. I know for a while, several years ago, what they were doing is they were taking like newsletters that were published, like email newsletters, and they were binding the library staff were binding them into booklet type things because they they were technically unpublished. They were just an newsletter that went out. But because they had a Michigan focus, we were trying to still have copies of those in some way, especially if the archive page wasn't cataloging those. So if it was something that we were getting from an institution that related to Michigan family history, and they were only putting stuff out in an email newsletter or bulletin, we were kind of printing them off and during the first few years of that being a thing, and then putting them in the collection as sort of an unpublished material. Now there's other stuff too that we're slowly trying to collect where that more relates to like certain societies, like a Polish American society based out of Michigan. I know there's something that's called the Gorski collection where Mr. Gorski donated a lot of stuff to us, and many of the things that he had were unpublished, but because they related to a society that had been in existence for so long, we sort of considered it unpublished but part of the collection. So we would have to, if you were looking for something related to that, we would have to have some sort of finding aid or something created in order to be able to identify everything that's in there. It's just, and some of that is still a work in progress. Like we got, we've still been getting a lot of donations from people, but because we haven't had the staff capacity to go in the building to process everything, it's all just sort of sitting in boxes. So something else that we've been trying to start doing too is that if there are Michigan authors that have sort of their papers of everything that they were working on as they were publishing material, that we're going to try and start collecting things like that because it's relevant to Michigan literature and just writing in general, which is also a focus of the Library of Michigan. So that would be more considered unpublished because it's not like the works themselves that the author created, but we try to have that in our collections. So I see one question here. Somebody was asked, when is the library opening? I'll be in the state the last week of June researching family lines. I can tell you right now, it's a constant moving target, and our work from home order is at least until July 12th. That's both for us and everybody else in the state, in state government. So that would also include the archives of Michigan. So the likelihood that we're going to be open by the last week of June, I can tell you pretty much like it's about 99% not going to happen, which I wish that wasn't the case, but we being a state agency are different than some of the rules that are relate to like local public libraries and other, university archives and things like that. So for now, the only thing I can say is just keep an eye out on our website and on our social media accounts, because that's where we would list once we reopened, or if we were able to give a definitive plan of when that's going to take place. I see somebody is looking for a book on Hillsdale County. We certainly have plenty of published histories on Hillsdale County. One website I'd recommend if you're looking for some of the older ones, especially from those centennial anniversary of the United States as a country, there's a website that's called Michigan County, I think it's Michigan County History. It's put out by the University of Michigan, Michigan County Histories and Atlases. And it's not very pretty looking, but it's really functional, especially if you get into the browse section. So if we click on Michigan County Histories and Atlases, and in just a second here, it should bring up the actual page, and it allows you to search by either, or browse by subjects or locations. So in this case, what we're going to do, instead of by title or author, we're going to look by subject. And then when that comes up, we'll look by H for Hillsdale. And okay, come on, computer. H. So as you can see here, it's got like Adrian. Here we go, Hillsdale. So we're going to want like Hillsdale County history. And these would be all books and atlases that are in the public domain, so you can download everything. So we've got here like History of Hillsdale County that was published in 1879. Portrait and Biographical Album of Hillsdale County, published in 1888. Another one from 1903. So that's going to be of Hillsdale County. If you also want to look under the city itself, there's also things like directories and church histories, maps, different stuff like that. Just be aware this is all it's going to be all pre-1923. And the directories are pretty limited. You're not going to find like every single Polk directory related to Hillsdale County or another county, just because I don't think the University of Michigan has got that all on there. But definitely a good resource, especially if you're really interested in Michigan family history and just history itself of a locality or an institution or something like that. It even gets into some of the books that have like the portrait and biographical ones, where it has like multi-page biographies of those representative people of a location, especially the ones who were able to pay a little bit of money in order to get published in the book. So, okay, other questions? Like I said, feel free to unmute yourself if you have another question.
Yeah, I have another question. Is all your collections, I assume they're all on WorldCat and Archive Grid?
I believe WorldCat, yes. I don't think Archive Grid. Now the Archives of Michigan, most likely, but for us, I don't think they're on Archive Grid. Something related to that though is that there are some things that we do lend out of state. Not a lot, but it's usually the print items that we have duplicate copies of. So our collection development policy is to always have 2 items, preferably hardcover, as my colleague Matt Pacer always says. And so that way that we have at least 1 item that can circulate. And in normal world, we would be processing WorldCat requests, but everything that normally would be occurring for interlibrary loaning, that that's just not going on right now. The only times that we have made exceptions is if there is a state agency that approaches us and says that they need something for the function of their, like a court case or a project that the Department of Transportation is working on or something else like that. So, in the future, hopefully that goes back to normal, but that's all going to depend on one, staff getting back to the building and our reopening finally taking place. That I've heard things going on that might be until October. So it's all a moving target.
Now that 40 volume set that you talked about, the Pioneer and Historical Collection, now
Yes.
that's only in paper, that's not digitized, correct?
It might be on the Hattie Trust website. So have you heard of that before? Have anybody heard of that?
Yes.
So Hattie Trust is put together by a number of the Big Ten schools. So your Michigan State, several others. I think like UCLA and a few others are part of it as well, Yale. And let's see what happens. I think it might be on the Michigan Pioneer Collection. Might be Historical Collections of Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society. Let's try this. This might be it, or at least one of the catalog records of it, because I'm not seeing every single volume, but let me click on one of them a second and see what happens. This is one of those things, like once I see the cover, I'll know if this is it or not. Let's see. I think this is port. Yeah, I think this might be it, or at least this is of the Pioneer and Historical Society. Yeah, the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society. So collections and researches. So I think this is it. You might have to dig around a little bit more to find like the earlier volumes that are from the 1870s. But if you just go on to, like I said, the Hattie Trust website, digital library, do a search for Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society, that should bring them up. Now, like there's this one, Michigan Historical Collections. Maybe this might be it too. No, that's something different. That's from the Michigan Historical Commission. But yeah, Hattie Trust, this is where they've been throwing books through scanners and putting a lot of stuff online. So there are some things that we have in our collection that you can find the digital versions of them on here. This has been sort of our means of still doing a lot of reference work for people without having access to our building, because so much has been put on here. It's just it kind of, you have to do a little bit of hunting and pecking in order to find specifically what you're looking for. But once you open something up, it does allow you to download the PDF of a certain number of pages. So you're at least allowed to get a sample of ones that you may want on there. Other questions?
We've had some really wonderful guest speakers in the past that talked about vertical files, but we may have some new people here today. Can you kind of go into a little bit of detail about exactly what a vertical file is?
Okay. Yeah, so with how it relates to us is that we tend to get a lot of things, whether it's handouts, pamphlets, newspaper articles, that we just can't catalog individually. And so what we do is that we will have sort of a filing system where they're all broken down by either places or topics and file them all in there. They're not indexed, so you sort of have to dig through in order to find them. But I know some places like the Grand Rapids Public Library, what they've done is they had a gentleman for years who was always hunting for newspaper articles related to different topics. Carl Bajma was his name. He was a retired professor. And so he had it where he was finding every newspaper article that related to charitable organizations and military veterans and certain types of businesses. And so those were in their vertical files at the Grand Rapids Public Library. We try to do a little bit similar, but it's mainly those, like if a historical society put out a pamphlet, and it was sort of like something small that really didn't warrant being cataloged in an individual record. So we would put that in our vertical file. Or if there was like a map that came from some place that related to like a historic downtown, we would put that in the vertical file. So something that's relevant to a researcher, but not something that we have the capacity to just catalog every single item with.
And could you tell the class a little bit more? What exactly is the Michigan eLibrary? Is it a consortium?
So the Michigan eLibrary is it's a partnership through the Library of Michigan and the Midwest Cooperative for Library Services, MCLS, which used to be the Michigan Library Consortium and a similar entity in Indiana, but they became one. And so it's where they take federal funding. If you're familiar with IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Services funding, they've taken that and made it so that all these databases are available for the general public in Michigan. So it can be like so MyHeritage is one of them. All these different ones that are available through ProQuest. I think that's who they primarily contract with, which is like the A to Z databases is where you can look up stuff on businesses. In fact, I can just bring up Mel to just show you what it looks like. So if you look under e-resources, this is where it breaks down things that are available for meant for public libraries, K through 12 schools, or if you want to see the whole thing, like Learning Express Library is on there, which is a great tool if you're looking to work on different proficiencies and things. Collections of databases related to peer-reviewed articles, auto repair, biography reference center. I think Indiana has a similar version of this that's called Inspire. I'm not sure if Nevada has something similar to that, but it's all meant that anybody in the state of Michigan can access it. It will recognize geographically where you're located by IP address, so that you don't necessarily have to log in with a card number. But it also has where through Melcat, which is part of it, that is you can search for a book and then request it to have it sent from like Calumet all the way to Monroe. And that's going from the far reaches of the Keweenaw Peninsula up in the UP all the way down to Southwest Michigan or Southeast Michigan. So a lot of, it's a really great tool. And I don't know how many other states out there have something similar, but it allows to have statewide circulation of items that you want that are available from one part of the state to another. And it's all through federal dollars that supports MEL.
So if you have a relative or a friend who lives in Michigan, they can have access to all these wonderful online resources and they can help you do your research.
Theoretically, yes.
I would imagine Michigan Genealogical Societies probably utilize this quite a bit, I bet.
Yes. In fact, one thing I'll point out too, that's a really good source for information is the Michigan Genealogical Council. Better give them a heads up. We work with them frequently, either with individuals that are part of it or with different organizations that are within it. And so the Michigan Genealogical Council has been around since the 70s. Normally they would be meeting in our building, but with COVID they're not. And so they put out a newsletter that has a lot of information on there. What's really cool is they also have a directory of societies that exist in various places in Michigan. So I know somebody was asking about Hillsdale a little bit earlier. I know they have, I think, what's the name of it? There is a research library that's in Hillsdale. Oh, maybe it's not on there. You might have to look on the Historical Society of Michigan's website. So HSM. They have on theirs also a directory of all the different societies in Michigan that relate more to like museums and historical society. Local historical organizations is what they call it. And so that's where you can get into those type of organizations. Look in Hillsdale to see if they have the one I'm thinking of. The Mitchell Research Center, that's it. So for anybody who's doing Hillsdale research, you're going to want to contact them. But if you're looking more at the genealogical societies, Farmington Genealogical Society, I gave a presentation for them a few months ago. They meet on a regular basis online. Fox Run did something with them, the different heritage societies that are on there. So if you're trying to find a organization that and you're having a hard time finding it doing a Google search, I would recommend looking on the directories for both the Genealogical Council and HSM, Historical Society of Michigan. They both also put on different programming. HSM's got some really cool stuff that they do. I love going in person, and they've been doing some good stuff, even just virtually. So I got to give a little bit of a shout out to both of them that are good partners.
So far, I think most of the stuff you've gone over are either in microfilm or paper format. Do you have, obviously, if you have a library card, you can get access to the subscription databases and such.
Mm-hmm.
But what about like that, where your library has actually digitized it and makes it available through like the MARC record? Like, like can you click right through to a digital copy of something?
There's some, and if that exists on there, it would be through LM Digital. But like I mentioned earlier, LM Digital is still kind of in its infancy. And I should give a little bit of context kind of about the Library of Michigan, about our history over the last 20 years that makes a big difference when it comes to finding certain stuff. So we were, from 2001 until 2009, part of what was called the History, Arts, and Libraries Department of the state of Michigan. Engler, I think, was the one who created that. And so you had all these different historical institutions, whether it was the state park, historical state parks like Mackinac and a few others, the Archives of Michigan, the History Center, us, all within one agency. There was that big budget crunch that hit in 2009 when the economy tanked. And so one of the ways in which their way of saving money was to get rid of HAL and then disseminate all these agencies out to other institutions. The State Archives and the History Center went to DNR, Department of Natural Resources. We went to the Department of Education. Well, when we went to the Department of Education, there was a possibility that we were going to be closed, either as an institution as a whole or only made to be accessible for state government employees, and that's it. And there were a lot of things that were cut out at that time. Some collections and a few other things elsewhere. And so we're still kind of working out of that big sort of shakeup. Slowly, we've been adding staff more in, but you're not going to find a lot of digitization projects going on, at least at this point. We've just started within, right before COVID, putting together a digitization lab, where it's got like a flatbed scanner, putting in a whisper room in order to do audio recordings, other things like that. But it's just, when it comes to a lot of the digital projects, it's going to take a while. We're working on hiring somebody for part of that. And I know that library development is going to be hiring somebody to help coordinate digitization projects throughout the state to help work with local libraries, so that either they could put content on their websites itself, or they can contribute that content to LM Digital. But most of the time when you're looking through our catalog, you're going to be either cutting through to print resources or to microfilm, because we're still in many ways living in a pre-2009 world, until that changes. And that's not meant to be derogatory in any way towards what happened, but it is important for anybody to realize, as they're doing research with our collections, that there's just some major changes, and that it's been taking a while to sort of catch up. And the archives has had the same thing. So so these two major institutions that used to be sort of the pinnacle of family history research are slowly having to work their way back up to what they were 25 years ago.
Okay, class, any other questions? Give it a few more moments here for them to either unmute their microphone or put it into the chat box. And while I'm waiting for that, I want to remind the class that when our guest speaker finishes this afternoon, our class will go on for at least another hour or so. And if you would like to work on your family trees, this is the portion of class where you can do that. And also, I want to remind everybody before our guest speaker logs off today that if there's anything that was in the chat box that you were interested in, whether it be conversation or links or whatever the case may be, download the chat box. You can do that either by simply highlighting everything in the chat box and copying and pasting it, or you can use those three little dots in the lower right-hand corner of the chat box, and that'll download it to a file onto your computer. So either way around. So let's see here. I'm just checking the chat box. I don't see any other questions, and I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. We'll give just a few more moments.
Well, I put up the slide here that shows our contact information. So the big things, if you do have questions in the future, call us. We're still answering the phones. We're still answering emails. So 517-335-1477 is our phone number. librarian@michigan.gov is our email address. We also have social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we're constantly putting content up on there, and it's also another means of communicating with us. I'd recommend email, especially now, just because of still working from home. And then michigan.gov/Library of Michigan being our website, and if you're looking for the family history content, michigan.gov/family history.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, it looks like that's going to be all the questions for today. And Adam, I want to thank you for your time and your expertise. And once again, thank you for letting us record today's sessions.
Yes.
And I will be sending you a link to the recording probably within the next week or two. And once again, well, thank you very much. And I will go ahead and stop the recording at this point in time. So hold on.